This video will help us with some tips about the color work here in Professor Fungi's cap. The first round of color work is only formed by the toadstool bump stitch, and I've already worked that round so that you can see what it looks like when it's surrounded by the stockinette fabric. When you're working it on the needles, you won't sort of see the full development of it, and I wanted to give everyone a chance to really see what it looks like. So it is sort of a little bumpy protruding stitch that I've invented here. So you've got the little bump from the knit front and back coming into this. Then we've got the extra twist here looking thing of the bind off part of this sort of maneuver. And then the way the stitch comes up into the next row of fabric. So this is what it looks like. It is not a huge bump, but it is visible, it is bumpy, and it doesn't require a lot of fussy work. So we're going to talk about how to do that. We're going to give some basic tips about color work and hopefully give you the confidence to enjoy this little bit. You can, of course, work the cap without any color work. You could come back and just sew buttons or glue little bits of white felt or duplicate stitch something on or add beads if you want. There's a lot of ways to do this that don't involve color work or that you could do in addition to color work. I'm going to be working this with the yarns held in two hands, but that's not necessary. And I will link in the description below an overview video I have for knitting in the round, where we talk about all the different ways you can hold your yarn, whether it's one-handed, two-handed, whether you just knit the way you always knit and then pick up and drop the yarn so you're not holding two strands at once. Because the color work is quite spaced out in Professor Fungi, you can definitely drop the yarn and pick it up, drop the yarn and pick it up. And that is a very good solution. The main thing with Professor Fungi is that the space between the color work stitches is fairly long, and so we do have quite long floats here. And if the float is too short, if the fabric traveling behind it is too short, that means that the fabric in front of it has to buckle. And we don't want that buckling. So we really need to be making sure that our floats are long enough. I have chosen to cut the yarn between my rounds. That is not necessarily. You can definitely bring the yarn up between the rounds and carry it on the inside. Just for simplicity's sake, while I was knitting, I just cut it, and I'm going to be tying it to itself in a knot. So when we are knitting the first stitch, obviously if you're carrying the yarn, you're going to have to make sure that that float is long enough. The stitches here that we are working in the second round, we have two plain knit stitches that are not the toadstool bump, and those ones in the next round will be purled. So we've got two plain knit stitches here worked nice and simply. As the video for the body color work mentioned, it's important that when you go to knit your color work that you make sure that the stitches on the right needle have enough space so that the float is the right length. We also, before we go to knit our next one, we can always just tug on it and redistribute that tension a little bit in this round. So just go in, give yourself some checks occasionally throughout the round, because you can actually kind of pull the tension along. Once you work the toadstool stitch, it's a little harder to work it back past that point. And as I discussed in some detail in the body color work video, you can also knit this whole round inside out. So if we were to put the toadstool inside out here, the inside of a circle is always shorter than the outside of a circle. So when we work the round inside out, the floats are being forced to travel on the outside of the knitting, which forces the floats to travel a little further and just naturally builds up a longer float. And I go into some detail in the body color work video and in the color work video, in the sort of the more general color work video that is linked in the description below. So I won't go into a lot of detail in terms of showing you what it would look like on DPN's magic loop and the other techniques of needle methods, but I will show you right here that when you work inside out, you're going to be working on the back of the circle, and you always see the right side of the work. So if you're interested in this, it's really simple. It's literally just pop your knitting inside out and go on and knit naturally, knit normally. The chart will be normal, the knitting instructions will be normal. You'll be knitting the knits the way you normally would. It's not like you have to reverse any of the directions. It's nice and simple. But if you want more detail, go and have a look at the video, either for the body color work or the one I'm linking below for general color work tips. The very last stitch of our repeat here, it's a 14 stitch repeat on the second row, is going to be the toadstool bump, the TB. And it's written in the written directions as TBC because we're doing the toadstool bump in yarn C. So that's what that all means put together. So let's work on that. I'm going to drop my other yarn because for this stitch we only need the one color and it's a little easier for me to show you. Holding the yarn the way you are most comfortable, you're going to knit front and back into the next stitch. Transfer those 2 loops back to your left needle and knit them. And finally, use your left needle tip to hop this stitch up and over the first one on the needle. Then continue working. And as I write in the pattern, this stitch, as it builds up here, likes to have a bit of a gap. So I'm sure you can see here how much space there is between this stitch and this stitch. So when you work the next stitch, it is a really good idea to work this one with a tight float rather than a big open float. So if this space back here is as tight as possible, it kind of closes up around that bump, which also forces the bump forward and makes it bumpier. This stitch doesn't have to have a big gapy hole beside it. And working the next stitch in the, for me, the red color really helps tighten that up. So again, we're going to be working around, making it nice and easy, checking our floats between our uses of the colors. So I've got my number of stitches here. So I've pulled these stitches back to provide breathing room, to force the distance between these white stitches to be the normal capacity. What I'm looking for is that the stitches here, the stockinette looks normal. It doesn't need to be like super, super, super huge because then you actually get an extra long float. So if you just hold it the way that the fabric wants to naturally be, just spread that out and then keep working. The finishing flourish is to go along on the first row where you're back with your color D, and you're just going to purl the stitches that were simply knit. Knit on top of the toadstool bumps, but purl these 2 stitches, and that's it. That's all you'll need to kind of finish off and make this look textured and bumpy and have fun with the ability to create sort of that texture. So just a nice little purl here. That stitch is loose and floppy because I joined the yarn, but I will tighten it up when I deal with those ends. But yeah, just knit along, purl those 2, and then I will show you what it's going to look like once I've knit a little bit more fabric. This is how the color work rows will look after 2 rows of color work and a little bit worked up past the decreases. You can see that the purl bumps aren't sticking out as much as the toadstool bumps, and that's normal. They will stick out a wee bit more as the stuffing is added, but the point of them is not to be super puffy, but just to add extra texture and interest. But that's all there is to this. Have fun, enjoy yourselves. It's just a gnome, and wonkiness is gnominess. Fudge anything you need to fudge.